Thank you for that introduction and welcome everybody. It's fun to have everybody here to listen to me today. I have just a few announcements to make. First of all, please make this as interactive as possible. Feel free to interrupt me. I don't want to just present and discuss my slides. So feel free to reach out, jump out, ask me a question. And if you listen to my bio, you probably wonder, well, these guys had a lot of jobs. Couldn't he keep any of them? So I think it's kind of a testament to the market today. If you think about job opportunities, and I think we all think about jobs at this stage of our lives, especially you younger people. I just read an article on USA Today that said that 14 of the top 50 jobs today are in the tech field. And interestingly enough, those jobs all pay anywhere from 100K on up, right? So it's kind of interesting that the demand is still there, right? And the real challenge, of course, is that we can't fill those positions. There's some 50,000 jobs going begging in this country in the tech field. I may be surprised by that, but that's the facts. So today I'm going to focus on innovation, right? And I'd like to ask a few people in the audience, just give me your thought. What does innovation mean to you? What's the word mean? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
The unique idea that you have that's brought to action.
Okay.
It's a new way to solve a problem.
Yes, yes. Anyone else?
It's different than an invention, but it's kind of a spin-off of the current invention.
Okay, good one. Any others? Okay, so what you're going to hear from today is Al Pappas' presentation of what I believe innovation represents and what I've learned during my career, right? So here's my overview. What defines innovation? I'm going to give you my definition. I'll give you some history, where history of innovation began, and get all my views. I'm going to talk a little bit about established entities, businesses that are in the technology field primarily because those are the ones I understand the best, but also who have been very innovative in the marketplace. I'm also going to address the startups that I advise, give you some insight into what role I play today in the startup community. Give you some insight into funding strategies, because at some point, if you're in the market to start up a company, you probably want to learn what the best mechanisms are for funding. I'm going to talk a little bit about recent technology trends as I see them, and the last but not least takeaway that you can take from this presentation. So I think you already heard many of you repeat what I'm going to say in line one. A new device, the idea or process, act of introducing something new. Something that's replicable at an economic cost. So if you can reduce the cost of something that already exists, that's considered an innovative idea. Evolutionary, where there's many incremental steps to changing or introducing a new process. And then revolutionary, a disruptive process, and new. The best example I can give you right now is Amazon. You think about what Amazon has done over the last few years, there's good news and bad news there, because the good news has made it great for the consumer. The bad news has created so much disruption that you're probably seeing more recently the loss of all the retail jobs. Well, I'm sorry, but innovation doesn't necessarily wait. It doesn't necessarily create jobs in all communities. So be expecting more change to come. In fact, our recent president has stated he's going to bring back manufacturing jobs. Quite frankly, I don't believe the chance of that happening is pretty high. I think more likely we'll have more technology jobs, and we're probably going to see robotics replace more of the existing monetized jobs that are easy to perform, those that don't require a lot of skills. So I think we're going to see a lot of change in that area. In summary, the process of translating an idea or invention into a good or service that creates value for which customers will pay. If they're not going to buy it, they're not going to pay for it, it's not really worth an innovation effort. So, some history. I'll give you some examples. In the 14th century, China came up with the compass, right? Very innovative for that period of time when you think about it. Morse, the telegraph. Again, we didn't have any mechanisms to communicate substantially. The telegraph was a major innovation. Bell Labs invented the transistor for the first time. And the transistor, as you probably know, was the primary ingredient in today's computers. Now those transistors are designed into many of our chip devices. HP, test equipment for engineers. These two guys started this company in their garage. It's still there. I worked for them for a while, so I have some understanding of what it took to grow that business. But today they employ some 300,000 people, right? So innovation can create lots of new opportunities. Turing, if you're familiar with Turing, Alan Turing was the gentleman during the Second World War that helped the English uncover the devices that the Germans were using to communicate. And in essence, was the first mechanism for programming. Even though it was all electronically driven, that became the basis for programming as we know it today. Univac Computer by Remington Rand was basically the first mainframe that was built in this country. So there were other instances of computers being built, but that was the very first one that became commercialized in a manner that could be used in a variety of different ways. And a company that I know very well, Adobe, PostScript, make marks on paper. Well, you might think that that doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does. PostScript is actually a programming language that is embedded in every laser printer throughout the world. And it actually dictates to the device how to print the various characters and graphics that you see on laser devices. And that language was developed by Adobe. I'll regress a little bit and give you a short story. The two founders that I worked for, John and Chuck, originally were going to build an image setter company, a very high-speed printing device. They both came out of Xerox PARC, where I had interacted for many years with them. And in any case, they started their business and didn't really get too far. This young gentleman approached them, who was one of the associates that they met during their PARC experience. And his name happened to be Steve Jobs. And he asked John and Chuck, instead of building an image setter, why don't you define something that can put marks on paper? He says, I'm planning on building a printer. And I think this could be very innovative. So in essence, Adobe, or you might say, can share a lot of experience from Steve and say, basically, he drove the business in the direction that it began. And owes a lot of success to his ideas. And last but not least, the World Wide Web, so Tim Berners-Lee. And for those of you who don't realize, the internet, as we know it today, was actually a derivation of a government-sponsored program that connected universities electronically with computers so that we could share between universities. And that was called ARPANET. And right now, if you look at ARPANET, the internet has become a derivation of that particular technology. So that's some history. So established entities. Intel, one of the largest chip manufacturers in the world. And as you probably have heard before, has Moore's Law that says every year the device itself will increase 2x, and it has. And it's amazing how much they've been able to put on chips today. The technology has evolved over the time, but it continues to be a driving force for technology. If you look at your smartphones today, it's probably got more power than the NCR computer that I worked on that I had to walk in to perform its functions, right? So it's amazing how technology has evolved, and that's a few years ago, of course, but still it shows that the transmission of technology doesn't wait for any person. Now, Xerox PARC, I mentioned Steve Jobs. You may have heard that Steve Jobs actually visited Xerox PARC during his early career, and during that time, several of the engineers were developing these technologies, the Ethernet, the PC, the laser printer, and they could all owe that those technologies to those engineers. It turns out that John and Chuck also worked at Xerox PARC. And Xerox PARC, unfortunately, didn't really push Xerox far enough from a technological perspective. I can honestly say in the 10 years that I worked with that company, they fumbled the future. They really didn't take it to the level that really should have. Frustrated me quite a bit as a technologist and as a business manager. But unfortunately, it was a financially driven company, and they were more interested in counting beans than they were introducing new products. Google, most of you know Google for search and AdWords, and now more recently the cloud. I think all of us can probably afford to store all of our device information on the cloud with Google Cloud. Amazon, as I mentioned, the retail disruptor, and continues to transform the business. You've probably read in some of the articles out there about the fact that they're going to start considering delivery by drones. So you might ask yourself, what is that going to mean for the delivery services? Well, delivery services, watch out. Amazon is a huge provider of delivery services today. And my guess is we're going to see a huge transformation in that area over time. Not just from Amazon, but quite a few other companies. So again, to regress real quickly, if you think about new job opportunities, I believe that learning how to manage drones, robotic devices, and the like are going to be future job positions that we don't have today. They're going to be very significant in the future. The federal government, as I mentioned, in space and military, sometimes we don't stop to think that the federal government really creates innovation. But in reality, the example I gave you earlier about the World Wide Web and their investment in the ARPANET basically was the underpinning for the internet as we know it today. But they don't get a lot of credit for it necessarily. And of course, in space, there's a numerous number of inventions that were derived as a result of those activities. And then our states, they support patents, R&D tax credit, and loans. They all support innovation in one way or another. And last but not least, even our cities, we have incubators. You have incubators here in Cedar City. We have incubators in St. George, where I'm from, and angel groups. I think you need to look, if you're going to be an innovator and you need funding, angels are a great source not only of funding, but also of expertise. Okay? So let me talk about the sports, the startups that I advise. The top two are both based in St. George. Interesting enough, Sports Stocks is an internet-based company that combines gaming software with stock ownership. And it's a game. It's not real stock, but it allows individuals who are competing with one another to actually bet on their favorite teams and buy stock and compete with their peers to decide whether or not they believe their teams are going to be outperforming their competitors. And it's a game that's been in place for a while. I've actually introduced them to some people at Yahoo, and I think there may be an opportunity for them to develop a relationship there. Generation Labs, a very small startup company. They build customized applications for businesses, and in some cases they build off-the-shelf applications for their own purposes. Right now it's a three-man business, right? But they do have a lot of customers. And they've built up their technology base from a lot of experience they developed in website development and search engine optimization tools. RentBid, again, it's an internet-based technology for last-minute rentals. So that if you're going to try to go to a location and you don't have a reservation yet, you can use RentBid to probably negotiate the lowest price you can probably derive. So I encourage you to try it, right? Again, it's a startup company that has good promise. Intelligent ID, an enterprise security company that began in Columbus, Ohio, where I spent the previous 8 years, and it provides technology-based solutions to uncover security you might say, lapses in day-to-day business operations of a corporation. So it's an enterprise application, and it basically gives major business owners the opportunity to look at how the employees are performing. So it's a little bit like Big Brother, but it kind of warns people that emails are being sent that should include keywords that shouldn't be used. I won't use those words, but you can imagine what they might be. And some of them might be kill, some of them might be more difficult to uncover. But they use that technology to derive and warn the management that there may be a security lapse in their employee base. And it's been very successful. Move Easy, another internet-based company. And what they've done is they've actually disrupted the moving business. So you as a consumer can actually use Move Easy to get quotes directly from moving companies without even calling anyone. So you can actually put in your configuration of moving information, your home or whatever business implements you might have, and you'll get a quote back. You can decide if you want to call them and go for the next step. Digital Keys is a hardware and software company, actually based in Australia. I met the founder in Columbus, and I thought it was very promising, so I decided to become an advisor. And what they provide is the ability to actually intelligently assign lock usage to certain rooms, whether it be a hotel room or a laboratory. So that you might use a ID card, or RFID-based device, or your smartphone, and use that to unlock the door and have access to your room or to labs. So again, a very innovative technology. You're going to see more and more of that. Today, many hotels provide this service so that you as a consumer, if you did make a reservation, you can even bypass the front desk. You don't have to bother checking in. You go right to your room, and everything is on your smartphone, or it's on the card that identifies you. Wearability. This is a really interesting one, and you've probably seen the terminology IoT, Internet of Things. What this gentleman did was actually invent a technology that harvested Wi-Fi to generate power. So think about that for a minute. Think about your future home, where devices are not only communicating with each other, but also communicating with you, your refrigerator, your microwave, your oven. All the technologies that can be built into your home devices are going to be intelligent. So if this technology takes hold, and I think it will, power does not going to be required to many of these devices. They can actually derive it from the Wi-Fi in your home, or in some cases, in the ether. So it doesn't require a plug-in, as it were. I actually connected him with some people at Whirlpool, and they're actually licensing his technology now. So it goes to show you how some technologies can actually evolve over time. And two others that are in stealth mode, they don't want me to talk about them because they fear that if I do, somebody might use their ideas. So apologize for that, but that happens periodically. Any questions about any of these? Yes?
So after working at some of these companies, do you use their ideas to advise on other companies?
Oh, absolutely. I don't reveal, of course, the technologies, but I do try to connect the dots wherever possible, right? And use it as examples, right? Because I think it helps to understand what was successful and what wasn't. So I can share my background with those individuals. And I think that helps people and innovators to make smarter decisions. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Keep anything like secret?
There are some things I do keep secret, of course, right?
General ideas.
Yeah, but for the most part, I try to share more of the information. I think you'll find that most people, when they're innovating a technology or a business service, they don't want to keep it hidden. They want to share it with as many people as they possibly can. So I think the more knowledge that people have of your technology or business acumen, the better, right? Any other questions on this area?
Al,
Yes.
one of the other instructor's last semester said that same thing. He said, share it with everyone.
Yep.
And I know within our entrepreneur community, it seems most of the people are so afraid that people are going to steal their idea, and I just tell them, listen, number one, your idea is not, if you meet with other entrepreneurs, they all have their own 20 ideas.
Absolutely.
So don't worry about that.
Yep.
So number two, the more you share it, the more everybody realizes it's your idea and nobody
Exactly.
witnesses. So
Right, right.
It really is, I think, a
In fact, if you think about,
interesting thing
yeah.
in the entrepreneurial world that to not share.
you shouldn't be fearful, quite frankly. I mean, in fact, you probably want to share it because you get more feedback, right? And if you look at the venture capital community as an example, a group that I've dealt with many times over the years, they will not sign NDAs, right? And the reason why they won't is because they don't want to put themselves in harm's way or be restricted from understanding and sharing your information. So you need to open the door. Open kimono is the best approach from a technology perspective and any new ideas in general. Okay? So some funding strategies. Yes?
Just real quick, I wanted to ask you, when you do go about advising these different companies, what type of involvement do you have? I mean, are you there like on a monthly basis?
So what my role is, it depends on the company. So as a minimum, I meet with them at least once a month if I can. I'll run the phone with them. And if they're present, then I'll try to meet them face to face. But it doesn't require me to be in touch with them constantly. Because in today's community, we think about email and FaceTime and all these other tools we have at our disposal. Doesn't require me to be in their backyard. So if you look at the clients that I advise today, only 2 are in St. George. The majority of them happen to be in Columbus because of the last 8 years we were there. Others are still in the Bay Area. You heard one is in Australia. So I can advise people regardless of where they happen to be. And if we do need to meet face to face, then those arrangements can be made. But it's not a necessity. Yeah. Any other questions on those businesses? Okay. So, talked about funding strategies. And I think number one criteria I always want to share with people, if you're going to start up a company, avoid giving away anything too soon, right? And we're talking about equity in this case. There's so many other ways to get funding, right? And the first one, of course, is your own wallet, right? So, I mean, I hate to say it, but if you think about the advisor role that I pay for sports stocks, that CEO and founder has probably mortgaged his house and he has an equity loan. So he's used as much funding as well as funding he's derived from his family and friends, but he hasn't reached out to a VC or angel communities beyond what he's got in his own circle of friends. And secondly, sign up strategic partners early on. In other words, you want to get people that are actually going to be helpful in getting your product known and also be able to use their skills in evaluating it. Because I think what you want to do is get it into the user's hands as quickly as possible. So there's 2 things that happen as a result of that. One, you might be getting some funding, you might get some acquisition possibilities, but more importantly, you might find out whether the dogs will eat it. In other words, is it going to be something that's going to be acceptable, right? You need to learn that very quickly. And also the feedback you receive is so valuable, even more so than the funding. Bootstrap again, pay as you go. Be a penny pincher. Try to get things for free. Try to lean on people like me for services, to try and pick my brain. And try to get as much help as you can from your own community. Pursue non-dilutive capital. In other words, don't give away the farm. There's lots of ways to get money out there and through banks and through other resources without giving away your equity. And match capital to milestones. It's very important to make sure that you manage your funds correctly and make sure you reach certain milestones that are going to be appropriate for you and those that are going to be acceptable for the business community. And even establishing a line of credit. Many banks, quite honestly, those that are forward-thinking, will establish a line of credit for you, right? So don't be afraid to go to your local banker and say, I have this great idea. But of course, have a history first. Have some expertise that you've developed and proof that this is a real business. They're not likely to sign on the dotted line unless you have something that has a revenue opportunity.
Question.
Yes?
Could you give an example of matching capital to milestones?
Yeah, so let's say an example would be the first customer acceptance, right? That might say, okay, I will not spend the first 20% of my funds until I actually have a customer that's accepted and signed the dotted line. So that's one example. Another might be, I will wait till I get at least 200 customers before using the next level of capital. So establish clear and concise milestones that turn into value for you, right? And have real value from your perspective and your customers. So does that answer your question, Janet? Yeah. So here's some recent technology trends, and none of these are going to be a surprise to you. Smartphone apps. Everyone that has a smartphone has apps on them. I'd be shocked if most of you in this room don't use several of them. And that technology trend is going to continue. It's not over by any stretch. IoT, I gave you some examples of Internet of Things, not just home and security, but we're going to see that take place throughout the globe, quite honestly. And quite honestly, we'll probably see more advances taking place in third world countries than we will even in our first world countries, primarily because they don't have an infrastructure to deal with. So they can kind of innovate how they use the internet in many ways. On-demand collaboration and contact. So how do you as a group collaborate today? Most of you do it by text, or you do it by email, or by phone. In fact, the phone on the smartphone has become a misnomer now. It's not necessarily a smartphone anymore. It's a smart device. But how often do we use it to phone as opposed to text, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in how we communicate and how we collaborate. I represent one company that's, I can't mention his name, but he has a collaboration tool that brings together all the different mechanisms of communication and provides it as a single source so that you as a student or you as a business person can actually interact with people that you meet at a seminar or you met at a business meeting and actually collaborate in a way that says, hey, who are the people that showed interest in my product or my technology? And how can I get them to bring together a group of people that I'd like to be connected with? So communicating and collaborating is going to be very key going forward. Mobile everything. I can honestly tell you that mobile applications, mobile functions in general, continue to grow. If you think about computers today, as we know them, mobile devices are going to overpass and pass, I would believe, the sales of computers going forward in the rest of the world. And so why is that? Well, the convenience, of course, is number one. But number two, the cost and the technology that's being built into them doesn't require us to be in front of a desktop or a laptop or a tablet anymore. All that technology is being built into mobile devices. Smarter devices, self-regulating. So, if you think about the example I gave of your home, think about businesses where their devices are going to be operating independently. And they're going to be smarter. There's going to be intelligence built into them. Again, not just robotics. It's, everything from how do you enter a door through how do you get people to open the lights in the room, to turn the heat on, things of that nature. All these functions are going to be regulated by some intelligent device. The one example I gave you earlier about drones and robotics, I think also holds true. I believe that robotic management and robotic technology is going to continue to grow substantially in this country and throughout the world. So it's not just a matter of being knowledgeable on how to build robots, but how do we manage them? Because as again, like any technology, it's going to require somebody smarter than that device to program them, to set them in motion, to manage them, etc. Those are all new job opportunities that aren't in place today. So as much as we like to see New technology does replace jobs, but it creates lots of new ones. And I guess the example I'll leave you with in this case is think about my own career and the number of jobs that I've had over that time. Don't expect to have one job or one company that you're going to work with for the rest of your life. Those days disappeared in my dad's and granddad's era, right? So be prepared to change. And what does that translate to you? Constant education. If the people that lost their jobs in manufacturing had learned new skills, they could have become employed in other roles. Many of them weren't willing, weren't able, maybe they didn't have the funding from the local sources to do that. But I firmly believe that we have to be prepared to move from job to job during our lives. And you young students are probably going to have to be prepared for that. So even if you have a startup company that succeeds, it's not going to be the end. Believe me, you're going to have many more others that you're probably going to want to invent or move into. So be prepared for that. So some takeaways and best practice. Innovation needs support from the top. Well, if you're in a business, clearly you have to have senior management support. If you're at the home, you need to have your wife's approval, because if you don't have her support, you're not going to get too far, right? So always look to the top people in your organization. If you happen to be a son or a dad or mom, you're going to need their help, right? So they're going to have to give you some support. I guess the second bullet is probably one of the most important. Listen and be aware of market needs and market trends. Think about what companies are doing and where you believe business opportunities exist and how they can be derived going forward. And that's how people become innovative. They actually think about challenges that they see in the marketplace or even in their own companies and say, hey, there's a better way to do this. I can build a better mousetrap. That still exists today, right? So whether it's a small improvement or a revolutionary one, those demands are always going to be there for us to solve. Risk is needed to innovate. If you're not taking a chance, don't try to become an entrepreneur. It's a given. I've worked in 4 or 5 startups myself during my career, and I'd say probably 1 to 1.5 of them became gold rings. In other words, that they really returned on their investment substantially. Majority of startups don't succeed. Or if they do, they get acquired. They don't return the amount of money that people expected to return. So, but most entrepreneurs are serial. In other words, they don't give up, right? So, and you can't. You have to have the mentality like a salesperson. You might get a lot of no's, but eventually you're going to get a yes, right? Building the right team. If you look at the investment community, one of the first things they look at is not necessarily the technology or the business model you have, is the team is most important. They're going to look at the characters that you have surrounding you and say, do these people have a track record of success? Do they have the expertise that I believe will lower my risk in investing capital behind you? So the team is very critical. Establishing a personal board of advisors. This is another key one that I've done during most of my career. And it's not a real board. It's people that I have respect for, people that I can lean on, that I can ask their advice, and they come to help me when I have some questions. So identify in your lives 3 or 4 people that you can reach out to say, hey, if I come up with an idea or a challenge that I have, who can I reach out to that will give me sound advice? And I think if you can do that, you'll be very successful going forward, even if you're not an innovator. All right? I mean, we all want to get advice, even if we're talking about getting married, raising a family, whatever the case might be. Getting advice, quite frankly, is great. And it doesn't always come from mom and dad. Join birds of a feather. Find groups within the community that you believe can aid you in your practice or your future goals. We have 2 great ones here in the southwest Utah. One is the Tech Up group here in Cedar City. The other one is Dixie Techs in St. George. Those 2 groups, that they meet monthly, and they're great opportunities for you to kind of listen in, what people are presenting, what kind of technologies are being discussed, and what businesses are doing with them. So it doesn't have to be technology again, but find those communities that would add value to you. Again, discover the funding options. If you're going to go out and try to raise capital, find the mechanisms that'll suit your purposes. And try to find the early adopters, right? I think if I look at myself, and I look at my CIO days, I always looked at new technologies that were coming out, because I consider myself an early adopter, because I came out of the technology bent, if you would. I was an engineer before I was a CIO. So I always allowed, you might say, new ideas to come to me, and new business startups to communicate with me, to say whether or not they would be something I'd like to try. And a few of them were home runs. A few of them were duds. But quite frankly, find people like I would be in those roles and sell them. Failure is a learning experience. I can absolutely contest the fact that most entrepreneurs don't hit the home run the first time out. In fact, most of them fail, and they fail regularly. It's okay. And I think when venture capitalists in particular look at investing in individuals, they want to see how many failures that they had, or how many experiences they had. Because they know that if this person has the gumption and the fortitude to stick to it, the likelihood of them returning success and returning an investment that they see as appropriate will make it happen. So those are the ones I think are appropriate. Any questions on any of these? Okay. That's all I have. I'd like to open up with any questions you might have. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. Oh, there's one. Okay, here.
What would you say your most successful venture would be?
So as far as startups, you mean? Yeah. Probably the most successful is actually, the most recent one was at Columbus. It was called 2Checkout. It was a company that was developed by an Oracle DBA to actually build payment systems for small businesses. And Alan at the time had a business of about 50 people, and he was basically selling to both Europe and the United States. And most of his clients were small mom and pop businesses. So they had a lot of turnover. The cost for using his services was low, and his security was very high. Two factors that were really very critical to people who sell things over the internet and the like. About 4 years ago, he actually sold the company to two private equity groups. And he invested at that time probably $300,000 to $400,000 capital, from various sources. The total sale of the company was $75 million. All right, so that's probably the most significant. Now, all of them don't necessarily make that investment or that return, but I think you will see even companies like Verifone, when they were acquired by Hewlett Packard, the stock trade was like 3x. So it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you're a stockholder in Verifone, it's great to be able to triple your investment, right? So there's some larger examples of how success can be derived. Can I answer your question? Yeah. There's another one. Yes.
You're not the only one that's talked about holding on to that equity and
Right.
diluting those shares.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some advice, some experiences where you've seen somebody dilute a little bit too early or a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And some advice on how to go about that when you start to be bringing in investors.
Right.
They don't want to cut. How do you negotiate?
Of course.
If you
Well,
go to a second round, how do you?
So the number one factor with investors is valuation. How do you value your company or your business? Number two is most venture capitalists or venture or angel groups quite frankly, want to get as much of that valuation as they possibly can. So you have to be diligent and get help from a finance person if you don't have one, and a legal person if you need, and people like myself that have been through this before, and help you, number one, evaluate your company appropriately and minimize the amount of capital you need to derive and minimize the amount of equity you're going to give away. One example I'll give you is a company that basically took venture money too soon, one of the startups I worked for, and as a result, they owned almost 50% of the company. They had people on their board, and they drove the company into a direction that was not where he was heading. They eventually forced him to sell it to a larger company, and as a result, he basically lost control. So, number one, maintain control at all costs, right? Never give away more than 50%, right? Because then you give up all the control you have. So, that's number one. Number two, seek people that are going to be value investors. What you don't want is just a bank. You want people that can help you grow your business or help you drive it in the proper direction. So you want to give you advice and guidance as well as money. So those are the factors that I look for. Does that help? Another question?
And I actually have a question. When you were studying in university, like in the art shoot, what was it made the biggest difference for you stepping into your future that put you where you are today?
So it's a good question. So I went to college. My bachelor's is from Brooklyn College. And I started out as a double E. I was going to become an engineer. Hated physics. But I was good in math, right? So I stuck it out with math. Graduated with a bachelor's in math. And I said, now I got this math degree, what am I going to do? What kind of a job am I going to have, right? You know, the obvious things were teach, right? Or become an actuary. Those are the two major roles that were in place today. So interesting enough, I was doing part-time work for a bank, and they happened to have a data processing environment at the time. And I raised my hand, and I said, listen, I'd like to think about maybe working in your department. Can I be part of that role? So I took this aptitude test. I scored highest on it. And that was my first programming experience, right? So I got into programming, you might say, while I was still in college, and didn't even know it, didn't even know what it was, right? And the term software engineer didn't exist then, right? It's called programmer, right? And programmer in those days took various different roles. It wasn't just a programmer that sat in front of a computer. It was programmers that had plug boards. So if you go back in the days where IBM, pre-360, pre-mainframe technologies, they had these wired boards that you'd have to program, like a telephone operator connecting, one person to another on a telephone switchboard. In essence, the plug boards was a programming practice. So programming evolved, from the example I gave you with Turing to what we know it as today, right? Now it's a language. There's all kinds of technologies for developing programs. So in any case, my career began as a programmer, not even knowing what a programmer was, right? So, interesting enough, I left New York when I was still very young, right out of college, and had some family in Southern California. Moved there without a job. Lo and behold, I found NCR has a computer division that just opened up. So I knocked on their door, and fortunately I walked in there and they had positions. And in those years, there wasn't too many people that had NCR experience, never mind computer programming experience. They hired me on the spot, right? I was making a whole $500 a month. It was a lot of money in those days, believe me. So in any case, that's how I began my career. But over that time, it evolved. I did diagnostic programming, did applications programming, I got into systems programming. I started managing teams. I learned a little bit about hardware. And I had to because technology in those days required you to understand the computer logic. My first programming language was basically dots and dashes. That's how archaic it was, right? I had to remember the commands in my head because we didn't have a language processor, right? We didn't have an assembler, right? So basically, we had to use programming in a very archaic tool. It's like using, chisel and marble today, right? So, yes.
Thank you very much for the very fascinating talk.
Yeah.
I'm a faculty member in the computer science and the information
Yep.
systems department. This is actually the area of my teaching.
Yes.
So I also learned a lot from your experience. Because for me to teach both, business students and
Yep.
technology students, I find it's a challenge to balance both needs. So for students, with technology background, what is
Right.
your thought? How much, business knowledge do they need? For students, for example, like business students,
Yep.
how much technology background or knowledge they need to be able to run this kind of technology-driven companies?
Great question. You absolutely have to have business knowledge. At least a minimal financial awareness on how to manage funds and how to report balance sheets and how to determine cash flow, things of that nature, are going to be critical to financial needs for technology-based businesses. I don't think you can run a business today without somebody that's smart in that area. The startup company that I advised, that's only 3 people, he has a CFO. Why? Well, he's a part-time CFO, of course, but he has somebody like that to help him, advise him on the finances, because he's not good at it, right? And yet, if he surrounds him with people that are smarter than him in that area, that helps him be successful. So it's absolutely critical. I don't know of any technology company that can succeed without a financial backing. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, actually
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Just very short.
Sure, okay.
Because there are many, many innovative ideas. So in your experience, would you be willing to share how you can make your innovative ideas standing out among many other innovative ideas? What is your experience?
Well, I think you have to prove to people in certain positions that these are really going to be successful, right? And you've got to find the early adopters. You got to find proof in the pudding. So somebody that you know can be a customer or a user of your technology or your innovative approach needs to be brought on as quickly as possible. You want to find out quickly because you want to fail as quickly as possible, because your innovation may not be a very good one. So the sooner you find out, the better, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'd like to give this a
Oh, wow.
for participating in our speaker series.
Great.